Hello, everybody. So my name is Jason Marcheck. As Stan said, I work for a research firm called GlobalData, and we are heavily in the telecom space, but also in a variety of other verticals that are impacted by high tech. So we have a really great panel here, and I think we're just going to jump right into the discussion rather than put up a bunch of slides. So I'm just going to start by asking kind of a stage setter type of a question, and then the panelists to my left here can introduce themselves, say a few words about their business, and kind of give you some of their thoughts. And when we were having the coordination call for this panel, one of the things that we were talking about was how much progress has been made in the past 12 months since the last time this conference is convened on both SDN and NFV. And so I think I'd like to just start by asking you guys to just say who you are, introduce, talk a few words about your business, and then share what you feel has been some of the most important developments over the past 12 months with respect to SDN and NFV as kind of applied to your own businesses. So, Allan?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Allan Langfield. I'm the Executive Director of Product Management at Comcast Business. I'm responsible for our active core platform. That's our SDN NFV platform, and SD-WAN is just the first product to exist on that platform. I think what's really exciting is, folks, this stuff is real now, right? We've really moved orchestration and virtualization from the lab, from proofs of concept, from spot implementations to something that is becoming very, very robust. We've talked the last couple of years about the challenges of scalability, economics, and interoperability, and we've made such substantial progress in each of those areas. Even though I would say the interoperability piece has more been facilitated through some collaboration between partners, we still don't yet necessarily have the standards in place to really say we've got the interoperability that this capability needs, but we've made substantial progress. So I think we've still got a road ahead of us, but we should all take a chance to kind of take stock and go, wow, we have moved substantially beyond where we were 3, 4, 5 years ago when this was a gleam in everyone's eye. It's real.
Hi, I'm David Hughes. Excuse me. I'm the Vice President of IP Engineering for PCCW Global. If you don't know PCCW Global, we actually are a part of HKT, which is the incumbent phone company in Hong Kong. And we do the typical carrier stuff, wholesale, voice, transmission, IP services. And we saw SDN early on as an opportunity to, from the bottom up, to sort of transform our network operations and to improve our efficiencies and to help us scale. But I think with SDN, like anything else, when it first started, we understood objectively what SDN was, right? How to separate control plane, data plane, provide abstractions, control plane, all those cool things. But that's sort of a bottom-up understanding. And as time has gone on, I think we've moved more from an objective understanding to sort of a subjective understanding where we actually kind of feel it, right? I think, if you look at, like learning a new language or anything else, you can learn to speak it, but until you start dreaming in it, you really don't have it, right? And so I think now what we're starting to do as an industry is starting to dream in terms of SDN and NFV. And we realize that NFV, for all the power it offers, if all we're doing is taking a physical box and making a virtual box out of it, we really haven't done anything other than put radio on TV, right? So that's what I think the biggest thing is over the last 2-3 years is the maturity of our understanding and how we can actually really start to apply this from a top-down perspective to help drive business, help drive revenues, help grow, and help deliver better on the promises we make customers.
Absolutely. John?
Good morning. I'm John Dickinson, and I'm Vice President of Commercial Engineering for Charter and Spectrum Enterprise. And we have been highly focused on in the lab and with these new technologies of SDN and NFV, working towards being able to monetize those, roll those out to our customers for new services, and finding ways to solve problems for our customers, listening to our customers and finding their needs and determining what they want in their network, and so we can provide those. And looking to SDN for automation and provisioning of the services and helping to reduce the operational cost of that across our networks. And looking for virtualization, I think to really focus on new advanced services, on just not as David said, really not just virtualizing appliances, but really looking for new applications and new things that we can monetize that our customers are asking us for going forward, and rolling those out with service agility and giving the controls to the customers so they can actually control their destiny of their network while we're still the service provider of the application.
Gotcha. So one of the things, I mean, I'm going to probably pivot a little bit on what David said with respect to, you know, if you're just virtualizing something that's already there, how much are you actually doing? And there's a lot of talk over the last year, but, you know, particularly at this conference as well, about SD-WAN. And for all of the, it's obviously very exciting, and it's something that's very interesting to talk about. But one of the sort of other side of the coin things I hear that it's really just a, you know, it's a use case. You know, it's not much more than that. And so, given the excitement around it, but then, you know, right, how much more has to be done? So I guess first thing is, can we talk about, you know, what you guys are doing? Everybody's doing something with respect to SD-WAN, and then what are the next couple steps beyond what has been announced over the past few months to take everything forward?
I think one of the exciting things is, you know, the market is really interested about the message of virtualization, orchestration, and that really allowing us to deliver solutions to customers rather than individual products. I think one of the challenges is SD-WAN today, while a great use case, oftentimes is neither orchestrated or really virtualized. We see a lot of dedicated hardware devices that the SD-WAN service is deployed on. And I don't blame anyone who's doing that in that space. There's a market opportunity. They're capitalizing on it. But I think folks need to be very, very conscious. There are a lot of implementations out there that are maybe great SD-WAN implementations, but they don't have the power of orchestration to grow beyond the SD-WAN use case or to grow beyond a single vendor or very select partner integrations. So I think we really need to challenge ourselves as an industry, right? The promise of orchestration is, again, being able to deliver to customers not individual siloed products, but products that work together very efficiently, that the customer can interact with, that the customer can change dynamically, the customer can add to with new products from new technology partners. And so we're a bit away from that today, but I think it's a good start. I just think we need to be very conscious of perhaps not giving ourselves too much credit or the industry too much credit just because we got SD-WAN into the space. I think there's going to be a lot of maturation there over time. From a Comcast perspective, we weren't focused on getting SD-WAN to market as the primary objective. Our primary objective was to build our active core orchestration platform and to do some true white box virtualization. The value to our customers, aside from being able to integrate and deliver a complete solution, is the operational efficiencies. I think, you know, it's common within the industry, you have silos of people, processes, tools, perhaps focused on different lines of business, voice, data, in our case, video, many different silos of that interactivity where you need people who are very, very focused and knowledgeable in each of those domains. And orchestration, the automation, allows much more complex use cases to be offered to customers, lots more knobs and levers. And that automation kind of moves away a lot of that complexity that was subject to error in the old model and really provides the customer much more flexibility in managing their complete solution rather than having to pivot 8 different times, potentially to 8 different portals or 8 different ops teams or call centers to get something done. That's very, very powerful for customers as well as for network operators themselves. So, you know, kind of want to say, hey, great, SD-WAN's awesome. Not all SD-WANs are created equal in their implementation, leveraging SDN and NFV. So let's continue to challenge ourselves in kind of growing that space.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you know, sometimes I look at SD-WAN and think it's sort of just a bump in the road. Now, granted, it's a hell of a bump, right? But it's not an end in and of itself. It's a means to a greater end. And some people say, okay, well, this is a way to give carriers a chance to compete against the OTTs, but not really, because the OTTs can do SD-WAN just as well as anybody else. So it really kind of falls right into their bailiwick. But what all this is sort of driving at, NFV, SDN, SD-WAN, 5G, all of these things are really just driving at delivering network as a service, right? And so that the idea of you know, having products organized around boxes, products organized around, you know, connectivity concepts, be it carrier Ethernet or anything else, which is sort of, you know, what MEF is striking at now, is those things sort of all kind of go away, and all of this stuff ultimately sort of gets pushed into the fabric of the network itself. So, eventually the connectivity is going to move away from, everybody in a location going to a single device to get out. And eventually, it's just going to be your device straight to the service, right? Or your device straight to another device. And so this whole mitigating concept of having this appliance or this device that gates all access to the internet kind of goes away. And SD-WAN sort of leads us to that inevitably, because it provides any device, any access to anything, anywhere, anytime, very elegantly, very quickly. But again, the whole idea of how do you orchestrate that, how do you manage that, how do you guarantee quality of service, how do you interoperate, carrier to carrier, SD-WAN to SD-WAN, all of these problems haven't been solved. So as much as, we love shiny things in the telco industry, right? And so this is kind of the next shiny thing, because we don't get shiny things very often. We're usually an 8-year process to see the next shiny thing. And so here we have this SD-WAN, which we can deploy quickly, efficiently, and get something new and exciting out that customers are asking for. But we can't get obsessed with that being the end game, right? The real game is network as a service and pushing all of these things into some sort of cohesive solution that helps the end user, the customer, navigate that long tail of possible options to deliver the services that they're looking for. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, so I think SD-WAN is an interesting animal. When you look at the origins of the technology, it was really designed to eliminate MPLS Ethernet circuits, and it was actually probably seen by many in this room as a competitive threat. But from a Spectrum Enterprise Charter, we're embracing the technology and trying to fully integrate that, and as David said, integrate it as a network as a service, and really integrate that with our existing broad Ethernet install base, and marry that technology to that as network as a service, and combining the ability to do layer 2 circuits and layer 3 circuits, and not just a pure over-the-top play. And so while it's seen as a competitive threat by some, I think if it's embraced and implemented into our network as a service, and Cloud Connect and virtual firewalls and all the other types of technologies, I think it can be very complementary to our existing service offerings, including our Ethernet, and it won't erode that Ethernet if we implement it properly and manage it as part of our network as a service solution. So I think going forward, you look at it, and the cloud providers could certainly have an SD-WAN service over the top and use this as just pipes. But I think as we integrate it into our service and use that technology effectively, I think it will be able to grow our business and help us interconnect, off-net connections like type 2. It may erode a little bit of the Ethernet exchange business, but I think as we get our networks more interconnected, that may happen anyway. So I think as we look forward, embracing these technologies and properly implementing them, I think we can be very, very effective with them.
Amen.
All right, very good. So I guess we started with the idea of orchestration, ended with the idea of being interconnected, and I will confess that the title of this panel, as we first conceived it, was building automated, virtualized, and fully orchestrated networks. So we decided to drop the fully orchestrated bit because that is kind of the biggest challenge. But given the fact that we've kind of touched on it right now, and that a lot of the POCs downstairs are really, in many ways, designed to showcase the ability for intercarrier orchestration, I'd like to just kind of maybe talk about it anyway and see, get your opinions on, we're seeing the POCs downstairs and there's a lot of good work going on. What are you looking for in the next, I don't want to put a time frame on it, but what are the next things that you're really looking for as far as carrier-to-carrier orchestration and trying to take that next step?
I think if you talked to any of us 2-3 years ago, a lot of us in this room said, wow, we've got to continue providing services over deeply interconnected layer 3 networks, right? Where we could assure things end to end and focus on things like jitter packet loss and latency. Not that that's not important today, but I've noticed a substantial change in conversations with customers where it's now no longer just about jitter packet loss and latency. That's kind of taken a back seat, and they're more interested in how do I have network availability that is near 100%, right? How do I make sure that business operations don't go down? The reality that I think a lot of us may still be struggling with, our perception of the internet is its best effort, right? And the quality of it is undeterminable. And while some of that is true, the reality is, we all probably stream in 4K on multiple TVs in our home every night at the same time as all of our neighbors are doing it. The internet of today is very different than the internet of 5 years ago. The bandwidth is there. We talked about gig speeds over cable plant. The performance is there. That 4K stream is beautiful. So if we talked a couple years ago, there was a lot of angst about, wow, how do we do service management across multiple carrier networks? I think, clearly the early success of SD-WAN is saying customers are much more readily moving to VPNs over the public internet because their focus really being on uptime rather than those traditional jitter, packet loss, and latency elements. And I don't want to say those aren't not important anymore, but they've substantially taken a back seat. I think that's kind of shifted some of the focus from inter-carrier orchestration from an operational perspective and more to the business process. How do I get a quote quickly? How do I get an order processed? How do I get status of that order? How do I quickly open a trouble ticket? How do I perform billing activities in an efficient manner? All of the off-net stuff that, MEF, we've definitely put a dent in over the last several years with some really great standards work with folks like Addis and other industry groups. But there's a substantial opportunity still to focus on those business process-oriented integrations rather than just necessarily the pure technology.
Gotcha. Very good.
That is very well said. Like I said earlier, that originally all this sort of started as sort of a bottom-up process of how to deal with the technical bits. And like Allan pointed out, the internet's pretty darn good. Even if you go to Africa, it's pretty darn good now. You can get reliable service. And so, the pressure of having to actually provision, services, connectivity services across carriers, maybe SD-WAN sort of relieves some of the burden and pressure of that. But the real power of this is sort of, again, that top-down perspective coming from customers down into the network. And so that's what I would like to see is again, continued effort on that, the business process integration. I would really like to see a dialogue start about how to maybe establish, some sort of shared blockchain for, carrier-to-carrier provision, some sort of shared ledger, if you will. That would, I think, would be a very interesting conversation to start. But like Allan said, it's really more of that business process is where we get hung up. It's not so much the technical anymore. Technical problems are generally easily solved if you put two engineers in a room. But the business processes and the business models and how those interact and integrate, those bilateral agreements, which have been the core of telco since its foundations. If you don't address the bilateral agreements, because even if we don't need to provision circuits, maybe now it's provisioning virtual services on each other's network. Maybe I need a data center in Russia, so I reach out to a partner or a vendor in Russia, and I can spin up, a virtual data center very quickly. So maybe the nature of the bilateral, of the bits and widgets that were provisioned across each of the network changes, but the business processes, none of that's going to happen until you get the commercial terms and the business processes and bilaterals worked out.
I agree. Yeah, I think from a technology perspective, we're all solving it with our own networks, a lot of orchestration, automation, and getting things organized. So when we have multi-domain technology silos that we're orchestrating now and getting those all integrated. However, when it comes to carrier, there's kind of these walls, and it's a traditional model, and trying to evolve that to where we can have cross-carrier orchestration, really using the MEF3.0 LSO, I think really gets us there. If that can be adopted, I think that is the key, will it be adopted, and can we have this between the carriers, a common API protocol that we can communicate effectively for service provisioning. Because I think customers' expectations are that they can go to a portal and they don't care if there's one service provider or 10 service providers in the path. They want to click a button and that auto-magically happens. And so I think we're years away from getting there, but I think that's really the expectation, is putting that control in the customer's hands, enabling the technologies behind that to do that. And as David said, I don't think it's a technology issue. It is more of a business relationship issue, and getting those solved so we have the business systems in place to have that automation go end to end for the services.
Very good. So I want to shift gears just a little bit. I mean, probably not that much, but one of the big underpinnings of automated, virtualized, and I guess eventually fully orchestrated networks is security. And so that's always kind of one of the big topics that I hear about whenever I do briefings with whether it's a vendor or it's a service provider. And so again, sort of like we were talking earlier in the panel about how things have progressed relatively quickly over the past 12 months with respect to SDN and NFV overall. That doesn't happen probably without some meaningful advances in security. So I'd like you guys to maybe weigh in a little bit on what you're seeing on the security front that's been particularly interesting to you over the past year or so, and what you have your eye on now is kind of a continuing pain point and maybe some advice or some thoughts on what might have to come next on the security front.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about security from a product, a customer-facing perspective. I'll let the engineering folks talk about the security around the platform. The world's changed a lot in the last 18 months on the security front. When I talked with some of the best security folks in the industry, and a lot of them are in the room, the answer was, oh yeah, this security stuff, you don't understand. These products are really, really complex. They require a lot of compute. We're never going to be able to virtualize. You've got to have our dedicated ASICs in order to deliver the security services in the robust manner they're delivered today. That's changed dramatically. In the last 6 to 9 months, all the great folks in the security industry that we've talked to have said, hey, I'm ready to virtualize on your active core platform, Comcast. Let's sit down and talk about it. And that's really, really exciting. And I agree, there's still some compute issues to work through, but we've progressed so substantially from where we were even 2 years ago. It's really, really pleasing. One of the interesting things, one of the concerning things with SD-WAN use cases is it's delivered over the public internet, right? And part of the great benefit of this is, great, I can augment the bandwidth of my existing network with really cost-effective broadband circuits in a lot of cases, but also connectivity model has totally changed. It's not just hub and spoke networks. Customers, even at their branch office, need to get to public cloud applications. They need to get to the public internet rather than going back to a data center and hitting a massive monolithic security infrastructure at that single location that they're backhauling to. The ability to access the internet at each branch location requires a level of security, and a security that's not managed branch by branch, but can be managed across lots of different branches in a very sophisticated manner. We made the decision that security just needed to be part of SD-WAN. Customers can't use effectively internet transport and SD-WAN configuration without firewall capabilities, a very strong stateful network firewall. So that's a standard offering that we made sure was part of the day one capability. You're now starting to see a lot of folks who maybe entered the SD-WAN space early on. Maybe they're an over-the-top provider, didn't have the security expertise. Now we're starting to see those security folks partner up with those teams to make security part of the SD-WAN offering. But I think it's a great use case that shows, hey, orchestration and virtualization is all about giving a solution to a customer. Not all these different piece parts. Here's your router, here's your VPN topology management, here's your firewall, here's your UTM. It's really building a package that not only is it sold together, but it operates together, both in terms of the customer experience and the operator's own operations capability. So I think the shift in the security space is a huge, huge transition from a product perspective than where we expected to be even a year ago. I get it, if you're in the hardware space, you make a lot of money selling boxes, and then there's a maintenance plan, and it's a really compelling space to be in, and it's scary to think about, if I don't have that box at the customer prem, that's a huge chunk of money that I'm used to making right off the bat, and then paying for security and updates once that initial investment's been made. That's a hard model to think about leaving if it's all you've known, but I see everybody very rapidly moving to a white box virtualized capability, which is really, really exciting to see. Again, it's real today.
Yeah, that's a long, involved, complicated subject, but I'll try to simplify it a little bit by saying, there's a rule in computer science, only variety can consume variety. Meaning if you've got a complex problem, you've got to have a complex solution, right? There's no way to make a simple solution to a complex problem. And so, again, going along back to the idea of the maturity and the understanding of SDN and NFV sort of leads us to that, because now we're able to make a tool, SDN and NFV, and use that to build other tools. And that's a sign of advanced civilization, when you can make a tool to build other tools. And so that's sort of what these things do. And so these tools allow us to take the complexity of building these services and not eliminate it, but move it down into places where it's more easily managed and more easily dealt with, so that now applying the security concepts and other concepts on top of that becomes simpler and a little bit easier to understand. You kind of compartmentalize and prioritize the efforts so that you can actually manage it. Because if we just roll forward, the security is a huge gap and we'll never be able to solve it. So we've got to use the tools that we have, the products that we're building now, to apply to that so that we can do things like apply machine learning to the process of threat management. So you can build security orchestration tools, because eventually the threats are going to come faster than we can respond to in real time. So you have to automate that part of it. And so we really haven't talked a whole lot about security orchestration. It's mentioned and people have products, but we still have a long way to go in that area. But the key to solving the security is to take what we're doing with networks and just keep applying that layer upon layer upon layer until we get to the end, which really will be never. It's a constantly evolving process.
Gotcha. Yeah. Agree. Yeah, I think if you look at the open source parts of the SDN NFV world, I mean, if you look at the, say, OpenStack, for example, in its open source nature, I think there's been a high focus on security. They've got a lot to prove. I mean, there's been a lot of risk with open source systems, and so I think that they've got the systems in place. They've put a security framework together. When you look at ONAP, they have a security framework. They've got security organizations. They're building source code secure interfaces and working towards that as a goal. So I think the base building blocks come with inherent security, but as you go up the stack and you go to orchestration and some of these interfaces that are talking to the business systems and the portals, there's less and less security. So I think looking at it from our perspective, it'd be good to have the LSO have a security framework included in that and have MEF 3.0 have a focus on security. I think today it's kind of assumed that each service provider will secure their network, but now you're interconnecting service providers' networks, but what if that interconnection is not secure? And so looking at those open APIs and ensuring that those are secure as you go up the levels in the network to higher level orchestration, I think there needs to be a focus on security there because it's kind of an area that's lacking. I think every component, software or hardware, should have security inherent in its device.
Yeah, security's kind of got to become the fabric of the thing
Exactly.
itself. It's not something you deal with outside of that. It's just in it as much as life is inside of us. Security is inside of the fabric of the network itself.
Gotcha. Very good. So as an analyst, we ask a lot of questions to people on stage, and one of the responses I've heard is a great question is something that allows a speaker to say something that he wanted to say anyway. And so John's answer was a great answer because I wanted to talk about ONAP anyway. So we'll kind of transition into that. And obviously the MEF is working with ONAP. A lot of the folks in this room are working with them. There's a lot of open initiatives going on outside of that. So I don't necessarily want you to comment on ONAP or any specific initiative going on, but I would like to hear either your personal philosophy or your company's philosophy on the openness movement in general and what you'd kind of like to see as some next steps in that movement in general, whether it be specific to one group or just kind of just throw it out to you guys to elaborate on the concept of openness and like I said, how it applies to your business or just a personal philosophy.
So I think we just talked a couple minutes ago about the fact that VPNs over the public internet kind of eliminated some of the need for inter-carrier orchestration, at least at the technology at the network level for right now. Maybe that just bought us some time, it got us to market, maybe there'll be things that cause us to go back and really dig deeper there. But even though we said, hey, that's kind of been mitigated in the short term, the reality is even within your own domain, orchestration is hard. It's really complex, it's really expensive today, and in the absence of standards, it's very hard to bring on multiple technology partners. It's very hard to onboard customers who are now coming and saying, hey, I want an API for every part of the business, whether it's service management or even placing a new order. There are lots of areas, whether it's carrier to customer or within the carrier's domain, that in order for this to really scale and us add lots of products, we've got to have standards, right? So even though there's some standards out there and great work from everybody who's contributing to those, they're not fully baked, they're not fully robust yet, they're not fully implemented. So we work very, very closely. Our technology partners, Amdocs provides our orchestration capability, Versa provides our SD-WAN service. We've got a number of other folks ready to deploy virtual network functions on our platform. But they're a heavy lift right now. The orchestration piece is a very heavy lift because it's not plug and play. We need to get to the point where onboarding a new VNF is all standards-based, and we can do it every day very, very rapidly. That's a tall order, though. Anyone who's working in any of these standards areas knows that complexity is pretty substantial. And if we talk about, needing to spin up, a VM on the other side of the world on someone else's infrastructure and deploy a service, it's not as easy as a technology piece. That's starting to implement, but also the business process piece that we talked about before. That needs to be in place. So, lots of area for opportunity across lots of different organizations. I think the ONAP stuff, awesome. But it's one piece of the puzzle.
Gotcha. Sometimes the destination isn't nearly as important as the journey. And I think with standards, I'm a telco guy, so I love me a standard. I really do. Standards make life a lot easier, but sometimes if you defer to waiting for the standard, you're not going to get anything done, right? So we have to sort of look to open source for a lot of the solutions to fill the gaps. But the thing that's important about the standards and what we're doing now with MEF and other standards bodies is we're building social capital with each other. We're talking about what needs to be. And so the journey in helping us mature and build that interdependence and that reliance upon each other to get things done and to come with some at least common sets of nouns and verbs is really the main benefit of the standards now, because when I look at NFV and it's like, okay, if we standard NFV, well, how is that going to change when we have serverless computing? How is that going to change as NFVs evolve into microservices? And so this whole idea of a big box that does firewall, well, maybe that's not the way it works anymore. Maybe it's broken up into microservices and different things do little different bits and pieces, and we start hawking these things around. And so what we do, with the idea of ports and connections and that whole thing, that concept gets applied to appliances. So you can grab pieces and parts and build your very own appliance, your very own network function. And so maybe standards kind of helps understand how to break these boxes down into their more discrete components, right? Because once you get things down to their bare elements, their essential parts, then you can recombine them in any way you want to build a very rich device or a very rich topology or a very rich fabric that does what you need it to do, not necessarily what a vendor thinks you need it to do. And that's what it's really all about. Is I always rail against the idea, I hate products, right? Because you build a product because you have a box, where you have a service. And that's your way of telling the customer, this is what I can do for you. And then sales and marketing is always trying to convince a customer that they can fit into that box. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, And so, as we need to kind of decompose elements and technology down to their fundamental parts, we also got to decompose the things we're offering up to our customers to some very fundamental parts and quit dictating to them how they need to assemble things and let them assemble the things based out of the smaller parts into the actual solution they need, so they can build their own topologies, they can build their own appliances, they can build their own devices, whatever they want to do, we can do. So I look at the standards as that's relative to NFV and think, it's great, but are we actually going to get a standard for NFV before NFV has evolved to the next thing and it's broken down? Is it even going to be relevant? But just because you're worried about whether it's going to be relevant or not doesn't mean you don't do it, because the journey is the important part, not the end, because there is no end in any of this industry. So
Exactly. So I think the having the MEF and the ONAP open source initiative does bring a lot of innovation. If you look at our technology suppliers and how they struggle to get integration, and we kind of strong arm them to tell them they must interoperate, they must fit into this environment, they must fit into this box, they must make this work. I think they probably spend half of their development cycles trying to get things to work in our custom environments versus actually delivering a new feature that we needed. So we look at this, and I think it will really accelerate. So if we get those standards in place and developers and technology suppliers can work on the feature and not so much the integration, I think that will get us a long way to really service agility and delivering faster applications, new applications to the network. And I think, as Allan said, onboarding a VNF is very difficult. And You know, the panacea maybe is the Apple App Store, where you can just download your VNF and it just works. I mean, that's where we'd like to be, and I can't speak to how soon we'll get there, but maybe having standards in place with open source, that combination will provide that ecosystem where developers now can focus on the app feature functionality and not have to struggle with all the integration work that we're currently forcing them to do to actually get a service out the door.
All right, so we only have a couple minutes left, so I'm probably down to our last question here. And you know, I kind of like David's philosophical approach to all this. And you know, so a lot of what we all do, I guess, in our lives is spend, hopefully, time thinking about the thing that has to be done right now. And that's kind of one of the keys to enjoying the journey. But you guys each have touched on a little bit of you know, what might be coming next or what might need to come next. So with the last couple of minutes we have here, I'd just like to give you guys an opportunity to share your views on, you know, we talked about the progress we've made between the last MEF show and today. So maybe between now and the next show or two, if it's a call to action to your technology suppliers, or if it's just a, you know, a vision for what should we be looking for in the next 12, 18, 24 months to take the industry forward as it relates to, you know, what we've been talking about today. So if you guys just want to take the last couple minutes to share your views on that, I think it would be a great way to wrap things up.
You know, David's comment about, you know, really chopping things up into manageable chunks, you know, triggered a couple really important things in my head. You know, really, you know, SD-WAN has been deployed as kind of a more or less monolithic combination of routing and, in our case, firewall and VPN topology management, but really breaking things down to reusable Lego building blocks. I want our technology partners to really think about how do we design all the knobs and levers, and leveraging, you know, service chaining is really tough. It's an important piece of you know, the orchestrated ecosystem, but really allowing us to then reuse those Lego building blocks very, very flexibly so we can meet the needs of new products that emerge. That's going to be very fundamental, rather than creating, I'll say, kind of a purpose-built monolithic, here's SD-WAN, all these things kind of pre-wired. We really want the building blocks, at least I do as a service provider, so that we can more flexibly you know, mix and match. We've got all the knobs and levers. Great, then I can create an offer maybe for a small medium business that's different from large enterprise, that's different than mid-market. They all have similar needs, but if I can flexibly adapt to different verticals or different segments, just by tweaking those knobs and levers and building a more specific bundle, I still want to keep this very, very simple for customers. I don't want to have 8,000 different SKUs, you know, but yet I want that flexibility to be able to, you know, mix and match in a way that, you know, isn't really available today. But that's a tall order. That really calls upon, you know, having robust orchestration platforms, you know, deployed across the industry. I don't think that's the case yet. We're getting there, but it's got to evolve pretty rapidly beyond the absolutely phenomenal SD-WAN use case to something that can more readily support the entire portfolio we're delivering to our customers.
You know, I don't know. When I look forward, you know, telcos, it's like going through rehab, right? You know, it's sort of one day at a time and do the next thing indicated, right? And so as I kind of look forward, it's like, you know, what do I want in 12 months? Well, I'd like to take a vacation, right? Yeah, I'd like to get 8 hours of sleep without waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning because there's an operational problem. But you know, so it's really kind of hard to say exactly what I want. You know, I know it when I see it, but what I'm thinking of is, you know, I love the Lego concepts, but you know, Legos are kind of boxy. Maybe I don't want boxy things. Maybe I want, you know, mini Legos or so. So I appreciate that, and I'm on board with that Lego concept. But you know, at the end of the day, open source has always been about taking small things, no matter what they are, and reassembling those things on your own into something that's unique for you, right? And so as we talk about standardization, maybe at some level that sort of eats away at our uniqueness. You know, and uniqueness is important, but even unique individuals have to be able to communicate, right? And so what I'd really like to see, I guess, is more along the discussion and refining of the social dialogue, the social capital being built between carriers, because at the end of the day, it's really not the individual blocks, it's the mortar, right, that binds them together. And so we can work on building better blocks, we can build on standard blocks, and those are good, but for us to really succeed as an industry, it requires a very strong mortar between those blocks, and that's building social capital between the carriers and making sure that we engage in dialogue and that we listen to each other. Because what I hear a lot here is I hear a lot of carriers really focused on that retail interoperability, but there's not a lot of dialogue relative to wholesale carriers. And the east-west part, which is sort of what MEF really focuses on, is helping us as an industry build that east-west dialogue, build that social capital between networks so that we can actually evolve to whatever's next. Because even MEF isn't really predicting what's coming next. They're just providing a platform to help us get there, and that's very valuable.
Very good.
So yeah, I think looking at the monolithic systems that we've had in place over the years and how we're breaking those down, again, to how Allan suggested, into the pieces, we see distributed computing, edge compute as a big part of this, and really taking NFV and leveraging that and taking even what's in the data centers today and pushing that out to the edge and running NFVs at the edge of the network and distributing that and running that as a logical system, getting the orchestration all to interoperate, to support running VNFs all over the place, whether it's on a customer universal CPE or at the edge or at the core data center. So really making that a seamless experience and encouraging our vendors to really look towards that distributed model where we can truly embrace that and implement that in our network rather than having to build these monolithic data centers where everything fits in this big data center and it all's enclosed in there. We'd rather have this distributed across our network and throughout the fabric of the network and really have it operate seamlessly. And I know that's a tall order with all the orchestration and business logic and everything else that has to be put in place. But I think we're starting to get there. I think the people are starting to wake up and realize, okay, this doesn't all have to fit in a data center. We can actually start to distribute this edge compute and components throughout the network and have NFVs and virtualization running throughout the network seamlessly, and it can migrate, and it provides geo-redundancy and a lot of other benefits to our customers that they may not even realize. But I think we will value that as an operator, being able to provide better service agility, service availability.
Very good. Well, we have a clock up here that shows 45 minutes, and we ended within 2 seconds of our allotted time. So these guys are 3 pros, so thanks a lot for a great panel, guys. Appreciate it.
Help Stan stay on schedule.
Absolutely.